I think there's an unspoken rule if you're a doctor that you're going to not mess around with some other doctor's income. And so I don't think we'll see anything like that because even if it's something they disagree on, even if it's something the College of Physicians disagrees on, they won't lift a finger to do anything because they will not stand in the way of these physicians making money.
Welcome back. This is the part two of Karen Mitchell's interview. If you missed part one, consider going back to watch the first part.
How would you handle getting the message through to the people who get angry when you try to tell them the facts?
In my cases where, I had the two most explosive anger outbursts, there really wasn't any getting through. They basically got angry and shut me out. They were gone. I think sometimes though, I know I had a circumstance where someone went around really bad mouthing me, calling me crazy for 3 years, and and then they actually apologized. So I don't know if as time goes on, maybe these circumstances still sort of percolate in people's heads. And maybe eventually they kind of go, wait a minute, gee, I really did act unruly. I don't know. Like I say, I tried a million ways from Sundays. I would always start out with the logic of the fact that no one in this country supports circumcision that deals with baby boys, only a few doctors lining their pockets. You look at somewhere like Vancouver, there's like what, four doctor practices there. They're all Jewish. Every single one of them is Jewish. But yeah, I don't, after people shut you out like that, you could just hope that maybe later they'll have some semblance of thought on the issue. But as I tried a lot of different ways to get to people.
So you're saying just a few doctors who are Jewish doing this, it shows that it's very lucrative business for them.
Oh, it's very lucrative, very lucrative. That's basically some of these physicians. One of them actually, not knowing who I was and what my thoughts were, he actually tried to get me to advertise for him. And I went to meet with him just because I wanted to see what he was saying and what he was offering. And this guy, led in his own mind, idiot, thinks he's some sort of an expert. He wrote some ridiculous book on birth that's like, when you read it, it's like a grade 3 student wrote it. It's terrible. And yeah, he was basically offering to pay to get people sent to him. The profit is huge. I actually had a woman in my class who was the assistant for the guy in Vancouver who does more circumcisions than anywhere. Neil Pollock is his name. Very strange fellow. And she left because he was such an odd fellow and she couldn't be part of it. He would actually he would wear like tennis players for the sweat, they wear bands. He would wear one of those. He had a big room where he had a lot of babies strapped down at once, and he on the circumstraints, and he would go, one to the other, 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 to the other. Boom. You know, it would take him, hardly any time at all, minutes basically of his time, because everyone else would prepare these poor babies and he would just go by and do it very quickly. So when you're thinking someone's getting what, $200-300 for 1 minute of their time, I think it is quite lucrative. I mean, that's, lawyers are 300 an hour. This guy, he could do, I'm sure, 10 in an hour. Well, that's lucrative. That's money, money, money. Yeah, I have no doubt that if they didn't make that kind of money, they wouldn't push it as much as they have. But there are several doctors in each um, city or community in Canada who basically make a ton of money from doing circumcisions. And that's the guy that people send all the other crazy people to. So yeah, they make a lot of money. I'd say, yeah, $3,000 an hour maybe for an hour your time. Yeah, I don't think they're hurting. They got lots of money when they're doing these circumcisions to these poor babies.
That is a factor that keeps it going.
Yes, we don't do them in hospitals here. So it's not government funded. Other things in our system in Canada are paid for, but because circumcision is considered cosmetic surgery, it is not paid for. So we already have made a statement that says there is no medical reason to do a circumcision. And still people are going ahead and paying out of pocket. Luckily, less and less people, it has been less and less over the years, but it's still very sad that people are continuing this.
What got it considered cosmetic by the government?
Well, that's a good question. I know for the registered nurses of British Columbia, I knew there was a nurse named Jackie Mayer, and she was a French woman. Her very own grandson got circumcised before she even saw him at the hospital. And she was absolutely horrified. And so she worked tirelessly to change the mission statement that the Registered Nurses Association of British Columbia makes. And she was the one that was pivotal in having them adopt the mission that circumcision was cosmetic surgery. In terms of that would be, so I don't know who or what was I know the College of Physicians have the same statement and made it cosmetic surgery. I don't know the story behind it. It would be interesting to know if it was also someone who was affected personally, or it could have been fear of liability. I'm not sure why they decided to make that statement. Could have been to, certainly would save money in the system, right? If you're not paying for everyone's circumcisions in the country, it could have been a cost savings that started it. I don't know what started that for the College of Physicians. I just knew the woman personally who was pivotal for the Registered Nurses Association of British Columbia.
Did she speak with the ombudsmans at hospitals?
It was more the nurses themselves who made that statement in their guidelines and whatnot. So I don't know if she'd done any of that. It was basically she had to rally the nurses to be on side with her, and she did. That was a long time ago.
Do you think that the medical professionals in Canada who have credentials are very strongly against this could influence the medical system in America?
I don't think anyone cares that much. It is such a non-issue for most physicians because most physicians don't do it. And registered midwives don't agree with it either. But I think it's such a non-issue and something that they don't care enough about. They say, well, I don't do it. I tell my people not to do it. It's not my problem if they go and pay someone to do it. And there's, it's like even the issue of ultrasounds, right? The statement that the College of Obstetricians have actually made on ultrasounds in this country is that it should be done on diagnostic purposes. But there's all sorts of private clinics and people now go and have all sorts of 4D ultrasounds just for fun or just to learn the gender or just to feel more in touch with the baby or whatever. And nobody comes out and says anything about that, even though they believe there's a certain amount of harm. I think there's an unspoken rule if you're a doctor that you're going to not mess around with some other doctor's income. And so I don't think we'll see anything like that because even if it's something they disagree on, even if it's something the College of Physicians disagrees on, they won't lift a finger to do anything because they will not stand in the way of these physicians making money.
How are ultrasounds harmful?
Well, there's been many studies over the years that show that overuse and use of ultrasounds, we don't really know all the ramifications. I mean, we know babies are affected by these ultrasonic sound waves because we see them react to them. We do believe that there may be some connection with overuse and overexposure leading to altered verbal skills. But again, nobody stands up and says anything because it would interfere with a lot of people making a lot of money, because physicians have gone out and they've started their own business, basically their own ultrasound businesses. And yeah, so nobody says anything about that. Everyone thinks it's just fun. There's no ramifications. And the thing is, it's the same as there's no money in doing all sorts of studies over and over again and talking about the benefits of breast milk. There's no money to be made, so nobody cares.
Right, the
There's no
formula
money.
companies want to sell their product.
That's right. And so so people will say, you talk about a study that's older and people will say, oh, well, isn't there anything newer? Well, no, who's going to pay for it? It's the same as nobody cares about, for example, epidurals. Nobody cares about long-term pain women have from epidural use or cesarean section. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to talk about it. There's no money in it. We just want to go in and we just want you to blindly believe that, oh, this is easier. There's no downside to this. I mean, for years they said that. They would say to women, oh no, you can have an epidural. It doesn't go to your baby. It won't affect your baby. Well, yes, it does. It affects everything. It affects your bonding. It affects your breastfeeding. It affects your birth. It affects everything. It can affect, there's millions of women walking around with long-term pain from epidurals or cesareans. Nobody cares. Nobody's ever going to do a study. There's no money in that. So unfortunately, for so many things related to birth, there's no money in it. There's absolutely no money in some woman having a natural birth. Nobody wins. Everyone loses. The formula companies lose. Everyone loses. You're never going to have newer and better and more research.
Well, what about the midwives? Aren't they employed to
Well, the
help with
midwives in this,
natural births? Right, that's their job.
well, midwives, first thing is, midwives in this country they're registered midwives. They are paid through the midwife's fee is paid through the government if someone chooses to have a midwife. And the midwives certainly they've saved a lot of money in that there is a certain number of people that will opt for home births. There's a certain number of people that will opt for a natural birth. But midwives are still employed by the system. The midwives still need hospital privileges to go in and work in the hospitals. So unfortunately, they are bound by a lot of the way the system has worked for many years. They're not, when I had my midwives for a couple of my babies, we paid them out of my pocket. They worked for me. I told them what to do. They didn't have someone else to be held accountable to. Unfortunately, because of the way, it's difficult because I want people to have the ability to have midwifery care. But at the end of the day, there's plenty of midwives people sometimes would look at midwives or doulas almost like another accessory. Oh, it's a trendy thing to do. I'm going to go get a midwife. I'm going to go get a doula. And it's not attached to natural birth. I think, some of the midwifery practices have done a good job at encouraging people to think about home birth, to think about natural birth. Absolutely. They may have done some work in that respect with their practice and with supporting families through that. But by and large, most of these midwives, they work in the system. They still are beholden to the system for their money. So they ultimately have to play nicely in the sandbox and not say too much, or they'll be like they tried to, for example, to get water births to happen in some of the hospitals. And some of them went ahead, but they had the support of physicians. Some of them said no because they had physicians that simply weren't willing to look at the research, and they had more power in the hospital. And so it didn't go ahead. So midwives don't have they don't have much power in the system. They're still quite at the mercy of it and playing the game. And then you have to wonder too, like once people have been in the system a certain amount of time and are beholden to it, how watered down do their ideas get? How it's hard to say. So it's good that we have midwives, but I wouldn't say their practices are, I don't know of any practices that are just home birth practices and things like that. They have plenty of women going to them that want every drug going and just see the midwife as another sort of, like a handbag.
So,
like I can have this now.
do you think that because midwives are paid by the Canadian government, that they're forced into following protocols that they know are not so great, that they're better off without, and it really
Oh,
restricts them?
oh, I'm sure they are. There's certain things that they have to abide by in the system, whether they like it or not. Absolutely. That's why you've got, we had some quite well-known famous midwives. They were actually my midwives that when midwives were able to be registered, they said no, they'd rather stay out of the system. And actually the Gloria LeMay, who's one of those, she went to jail for it. She was thrown in jail for practicing medicine without a license for a while because of it. So I have no doubt that they absolutely have to agree with. I mean, my daughter in Calgary here, she had a midwife for my granddaughter's birth, just at a little birth house. And I remember they were trying to get her to go for the gestational diabetes test. And I said to her, you don't need to go for that. You're healthy, you know what to eat. We don't have a history in our family. You don't need to be bothered with that. And she felt pressured to go. And the only reason she didn't was because they had horrible appointment times, like 6 a.m. and just terrible appointment times. And she's like, oh, she just couldn't be bothered going. And she went in, it was this English lady who was her midwife, nice enough. But even with that, I found there were things she said and did that I was like, oh my God, what's she on about? And when my daughter said to her, oh, she never got into the gestational diabetes appointment, she says, well, I'm not too worried. I eat well and I don't have a history. And the midwife actually said to her, oh, gestational diabetes, oh, that has nothing to do with what you eat. Pardon? Yes, it does.
Do you talk to other midwives who are intactivists?
Oh, yes, I have. Yeah.
Are they all in Canada?
Yes, mostly. Although in my Facebook, I have a lot of connections with a lot of different doulas and midwives in other places, mostly the States. Actually, some of them that I had connected to because of our shared birth experience. I've had to actually get rid of some people because of our differences when it comes to gender ideology, even though they were against newborns having surgery performed. They seem to have different thinking that way than I do. So who knows? There's this whole thing surrounding it, which was a bit the same with the COVID, where it's like, well, if you're nice, you think the way we do. And if you're not a nice person, you think the other way. And so they seem to have gone into that extreme, even though we agreed when it came to the intactivism. I don't know what people are thinking. It's quite clear the system's out to get you. And starting with the brainwashing, the fact that people would be willing to sacrifice their baby boys to conform to someone or something that isn't based in any kind of reality. That's enough. To look at pictures of little boys before and after. I don't need any statistics. I don't need anything else. I have eyes. I can see. I'm a human. I can feel. And something really detrimental must have happened to these people if they've lost touch with that part of their humanity.
I think the way the system preys on people, uses people, is it gets them to doubt themselves. So they believe they don't know and only the professionals do. And that way, you have to be a consumer. You have to use their product. You can't do it yourself. They need you to
Yeah,
believe that.
100%. Useless medical testing. It's actually worse than useless. It's very often harmful. Like somehow these magical tests are going to have some sort of control over your health. When no, they don't. You're the only one that has control over your health. In this province, when you're 75, you have to go to doctors for your driver's license. If I live till then, what will that look like for someone like me? Because I don't go to doctors. I don't go for their testing. I don't go. It's like, well, baby checks. What kind of an idiot are you if you don't know if your baby's well or not? Every parent should know, and every parent, I believe, does have that innate sensibility to know if their baby's well or not. That's an example of exactly what you're talking about, a well baby check. Because somehow you're too stupid to know if your baby's well or not. You have to ask your doctor, is my baby well or not? Nuts. Nuts. I never did any of those either.
We as a species have survived for at least a couple 100,000 years, long before medical scientific technology was this advanced. And we got there by knowing what to do and having some sense. And the more we lean on technology, the less capable we are. It's
Yeah.
time to go back to having the knowledge of how to survive, the lost ways.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
People would freak out if there was a massive power outage, but 100 years ago, that was normal everyday life to live your life without electricity.
And I certainly wouldn't be living here if that was the case. It's too cold in the winter. It would not be the place to live. In my prenatal classes, the big takeaway, people would go away feeling better. They would feel more confident because they had forgotten to check in with themselves. How do I feel? What do I know about this? One of the biggest times in your life when that happens, unfortunately, because of the system, is when women get pregnant. Since the beginning of forever, I mean, well, things changed with clean water and better hygiene, but even since then, we've always had about a 7% mortality rate. Some babies don't make it. A third of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. That's not wrong. That's right. That's the body saying, hey, this isn't a good one. Better luck next time. I understand how incredibly emotional it is when someone is stuck in that. It's a very hard place to be. But the reality is, the body said, no, not good enough. Move on. Try again. So we have been designed to survive, but we have been handed this complete ridiculous notion that there is some sort of bubble of safety that you can live in. And that if you do what the authorities say, you will be safe and you will be okay. And that is the biggest lie of all time. And unfortunately, a lot of people buy into it. They're just too afraid to live on their own wisdom. And that is unfortunately what has really brought us down as a society and as humans, is not being true to who we are and what we already know. Because we know at some level that you're not healthy if you're injecting poison, if you're 400 pounds. We know that's the truth. But we are in such denial. I actually believe that a lot of that comes from the fact that people have had their growth stunted. So they might be walking around looking like adults, but they actually have a very teenage mentality, in that there aren't consequences. You don't need to take responsibility for your actions, and it lets you off the hook. And I realized that a long time ago. I remember when our neighbor was pregnant and she was going in for her second cesarean. My first reaction was, oh, gosh, that's harsh, you know, like to have surgery when you've already got a toddler to look after, you can have a new baby, and then on top of that, you got to recuperate from major surgery. That's rough. That was my first thought was, you know, a bit of empathy for the poor woman and what she would have to go through. And my daughter, she was 16 at the time. She says, well, yeah, but then they do it for you. And I went, oh, that's what it is. We have a society of people who are teenagers. They've never matured. They're not full-grown adults. They're teenagers. And so for them, well, if I don't take the responsibility, if something bad happens, it's their fault. It's not my fault. Thank God. My daughter grew out of it. She had a perfectly natural, wonderful birth with her daughter.
That's also what the pharmaceutical companies, they don't take any liability either. Side effects. So, well, you agreed to the injection.
You thought it was a good idea. It's a sad state of affairs, but I think that's what we're all walking around with, a bunch of people in society that are just children. They haven't evolved into adulthood.
You have shown that getting involved in intactivism makes you more aware of other things going on. It helps you see the bigger picture. So it's certainly why activists will do multiple causes, because it makes them aware of other causes and they care about those as well.
Absolutely, especially if you've been in a situation like we have, where you've been out trying to talk to people reasonably about intactivism and about keeping our boys whole. I bet you there isn't one amongst us that hasn't had somebody really get angry and start to get strangely emotionally angry about it, as opposed to just having a discussion. And when you see that, and again, that's a little bit the same as the woke crowd getting crazy emotional, instead of being able to be an adult and have a discussion about something. If you've been in situations like us where you've been out protesting, you've been standing up and talking, you've been wanting to have conversations with people and running across people who literally are vicious. They want to do you harm simply for sharing some information. You can see how all these topics, they're all connected, because when something that they just hold as the truth is questioned, when they get so emotionally upset and unstable about it, you really do see how deeply rooted these ridiculous things are in our culture.
The psychological harm is significant.
The psychological harm is major.
And it hides under the surface.
They're all walking around like they're normal. And then you bring up one topic and they go off the deep end. They turn into crazy people. All of the men involved in the intactivist movement, I've found so genuine, so honest, so down to earth, just so open. And I've had some of my best conversations ever with men in the intactivist movement, because there's no airs. Yeah, it's just lovely to be surrounded with people like that.
Because they face the truth, so they're all honest with themselves.
Yeah. It's really wonderful. It feels so good to be surrounded by people like that. It gives you hope.
Yes, it does.
Okay, that was Karen part 2. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'll put her links down in the description below so you can follow her. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our other interviews and other intactivist content we release every single week. Please share and like this video to get this out to more people. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Bye.